Welcome back to also cybersecurity episodes with Cyber Queen. Let's discuss simple ways to manage access control with Microsoft 365. With the fast shift to cloud and digital business models, we need to make sure that the right people have access to the right data and information assets at the right time. This is a really important aspect of modern identity-centric security. Hi, I'm Venicia. I'm the founder of Cyber Queen, a cloud security architect and a Microsoft MVP. Together with Also, we bring you cybersecurity insights backed with the latest news and diverse perspectives. Don't forget to check out the Also Cloud Marketplace for more awesome insights. Alright, let's talk about identity and access management, IAM, in Microsoft 365. Now, access control isn't just about letting employees log into their accounts. It's about protecting your business from unauthorized access. And for SMBs, managing access can be challenging considering the vast use of sanctioned and unsanctioned applications, shadow IT, shadow data, and especially with limited IT resources. Identity and access management, IAM, helps businesses streamline this process and keep their digital assets secure. But how does this really work? And how does it benefit your business? Now, Microsoft 365, of course, uses Entra ID. The platform introduces multiple security benefits, and these benefits include simpler but user-centric controls, like, as an example, multi-factor authentication or conditional access policies to really simplify user verification. And then there is also the user-centric aspect of SSO, single sign-on, for simpler and cleaner access management, of course, enhancing and strengthening security in the process. When you are a Microsoft 365 consumer, you already have access to use the Identity as a Service platform, Entra ID. But depending on your license model, you have access to further services and capabilities. So let's go ahead and break this down and discuss what is included and how you can use it more effectively. Now, to look at some of the key features that's available as part of these different plans, we'll go to Entra ID. So you can go to entra.microsoft.com, or you can also find Entra ID in the Microsoft 365 admin portal. So once you go to the Entra portal, you will get to the landing page. And from here, you can basically navigate and do a bunch of things. So firstly, from an E3 perspective, this includes centralized user management. So if you look at the user section, you can manage all of your tenant-based users from here. And this includes the ability to set up multiple things for your users, like multi-factor authentication, like self-service password reset, which is a real service improvement when it comes to small businesses, especially considering that you may not have that many IT professionals to support all users, and users can then have their passwords reset via the self-service password reset, which enhances productivity and, of course, overall security. It reduces kind of the IT-assisted password reset process by over 20%. Now, the next thing here is also that you can then manage groups. So groups are extremely powerful when it comes to security groups and different access level groups, right? So you can have Microsoft 365 groups that you give users access to certain tools, platforms, files, folders, etc. Or you can also have your security groups where you also kind of control access or logins to different apps and platforms, etc. These can be dynamic groups as well. So when a user does a certain action, they can be added or removed from a certain group. And this again removes kind of that administrative overhead for your admins. The last thing I want to call out here is single sign-on. So when we look at the application section over here and we look at enterprise applications, this is where you can register an external enterprise application, and you can basically navigate this application or configure this application to use your Entra ID to sign in. This means that we reduce the number of accounts a user requires, which means we reduce the number of risky passwords that users can have and lack of MFA that users can have. But we also enhance productivity, we enhance user experience by enabling single sign-on. These are some of the kind of notable features to call out in E3. One of the biggest notable features to call out when you have E3 and you have Entra ID P1 licenses, then you also have access to Microsoft's conditional access. Now, conditional access is really powerful. So when we go down here to protection and we then go to the security center, from here we can see basically different security features and capabilities that you are able to enable. So conditional access allows for the ability to enforce access requirements when specific conditions occur. So let's give an example. A user is working from a completely different country. You have never kind of operated out of that country. You can suddenly block that user because this is not an authorized country of application for your company. So this is where conditional access policies become really, really critical. Then you can also set certain conditions. So with the E3, you can enable multi-factor authentication enforcement as part of your conditional access policies. So what this means is that you are able to select that if a user is working from home and not from the office, or they're working from an unknown new location, then they need to be prompted for multi-factor authentication. But if they're working from the office and you have a named office location, then they don't likely need to be prompted for multi-factor authentication at that point. So it's really powerful, really customizable. Now let's look at some of the more advanced features that you have access to when you go to the E5 side of things. So with an E5 license, we look at firstly identity protection. Now identity protection enables for the anomalous detection based on user behavior. So this is extremely important, moving to that kind of real-time or near real-time malicious behavioral analysis of user accounts. This allows us to understand kind of who our risk users are based on what they're doing, and if there's a potential anomaly in their behavior and that has changed and we see identity-based threats, that's what we will detect with the use of identity protection. Another key thing to call out here when it comes to an E5 and Entra ID P2 license is the ability to have privileged identity management. Now, using privileged identity management is so powerful to manage your identity life cycles and your privileged access, and to enforce things like just-in-time access. What this allows us to do is that if a user requires access to specific sensitive information or specific access, let's say to manage your IT assets in Azure, you can then give them the ability to be added to a specific group, which means that you streamline kind of IT overhead and user management. But in order for them to make a configuration change, they need to go and request just-in-time access. This is really, really powerful to kind of enable the workforce to move ahead from a productivity perspective, but then to also make sure that the access is granted and removed when no longer in use. Really powerful. Then the final one I want to call out here is access reviews. So having that automated access reviews in place when it comes to user identity and what they still have access to is an extremely powerful feature, which we will dive into in some of our upcoming episodes. Now, next I want to move along and talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication, as you know, from a security perspective, is super necessary, absolutely required, and absolutely fundamental as a security control. Entra ID provides the ability to have multi-factor authentication enabled and enforced in the basic license, which means it's the free version, in the P1 and P2 license bundles. However, with additional capabilities. Now, what this means is that you have multi-factor authentication configured on Entra ID with basically different authentication methods. This can include the Microsoft Authenticator app, your SMS, or a phone call. But when moving to Entra ID P1 as an example, you can now use multi-factor authentication as an enforcement point within your conditional access policies, which makes it really powerful. If we look back at the example earlier, if a user is working from a different remote location, you likely want to prompt for a multi-factor authentication just to ensure that it is actually the user and they can do that kind of second step to verification. And with Entra ID P2, you can also have multi-factor verification and authentication checks when using things like privileged identity management, which really provides that kind of additional step when a user is elevating their permission. They then need to multi-factor authenticate that elevation of permission so that you know the right person is elevating their permissions. All right. We discussed simple ways to manage access control with Microsoft 365. We highlighted the importance of identity and access management, IAM for SMBs, and we showed you how Microsoft Entra ID helps you to manage access effectively. You should now have a clearer understanding of how Microsoft 365 and Entra ID simplify and strengthen access control, providing your business with enhanced security. Now, in the next video, we will dive into deeper discussions and demos on how to use conditional access policies, what security defaults are, and best practices for access control. For more information and helpful resources, remember to check out the Also Cloud Marketplace, where you can find everything you need to secure your business. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay secure.